We are live. Let's start this meeting. We'll call it to order at 4:30 p.m. on Monday, June 7th. And roll call, Mr. Russi.
Councilmember Lau.
Present.
Councilmember Crosby.
Here.
Councilmember Carter.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Davis.
Here.
Mayor Hepburn.
Here.
Great. All right. Thank you all. Well, good afternoon. Would you like me just to jump into it, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, please. This is for our 2021-22 city budget. And
yes.
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, as is customary, I will spend a couple of minutes just giving some general overview. Some of the stuff council probably will be redundant to our preliminary budget study session, but worth going over. And then you'll have an opportunity to hear from each of the departments, for them to go through some of the specifics on their requests, plus answer any questions council may have of those requests or operational interests that you have. And then I'll follow up and wrap up with the capital improvements and capital outlay portion of the budget. With that, I'm going to ask JR to do a share screen and pull up PowerPoint that we've prepared for the meeting. Thank you. All right, go to the next slide, the first slide. So this is kind of an outline of our current budget process that we followed. I went through this in a different format last time, and the bolded is where we are at today. I think it's just important to identify all the steps that are taken in preparation for getting us to this point, and the work that goes into bringing something forward for the council's consideration at this point. In between last meeting and this, you'll see we had a review by Measure LV Oversight Committee, who approved the use, which I'll talk in more detail about, of the Measure LV money relative to the Tier 1 expenses, which is basically to keep pace with the median adjustments that are going to be included in this year's budget, as well as the additive of what was last year as well. Then we have tonight's presentation, and then you'll have the final budget adoption on your June 21st meeting. So tonight will really be to conceptually approve the budget, as it is a study session only, and then put it on for that final approval before the July 1 date, which is when your budget needs to be approved by. The last thing, and we added this last year due to COVID, but I left this on here because I thought it was a very worthwhile effort to bring back on a periodic basis just a status of where our revenues are in receipts in relation to estimates. Certainly, we've built this budget around what this last year looked like as revenues, which we normally do. But again, there is the potential for the recovery not to be as robust as we hope it to be, or other factors to come into play. So I think having that step in place has been worthwhile, and I will be incorporating it as part of your ongoing budget process. Next slide. So high level overview by the numbers. Your total budget, which includes all funds, general fund included, is just under $64 million. That includes 8.5 in capital CIP projects, $12.5 million, which is your water and sewer, which are your utility, as the city runs it and operates its own utility systems. And then just over $4 million in all other funds. And those are things other than the general fund or those specified. So that could be your Measure R, your Measure M, CDBG, asset forfeiture, all that gets encompassed to what the other funds are. And then your general fund, which is the predominant discussion of today, because that's really the funds that you have the most control over, I'd say, as far as their use, because they're not restricted in their use, is 38.6. And as we reported last meeting, we are looking at using just about $600,000 to balance out the budget. 500,000 of that is one-time expenditure, just over 500,000, leaving a structural reoccurring deficit of about $100,000, which I am happy and proud to present that as the budget going forward for the next year. The status of your reserves are projected to be 9.7, which are better than what we had anticipated they would be at the end of this year. And that's predominantly due to the the receipt of the CARES Act money that came through as a result of assisting with the state's assistance with COVID-related expenses. So we were able to set that money aside, and we are replenishing your reserves with that money at this time. Or that's what the plan is. Resources, this just gives you a high-level overview of all the resources and where we get the funds for to offer the services that we do. And as you can see, it's a whole host of funding sources that we use. Now, when we drill it down, next slide, to the general fund, you'll see there's certainly less opportunities. And the thing that I think is worth pointing out of note is your major reoccurring sources, which are your VLF, your utility users tax, your sales tax, and your property tax, make up 2/3 of your revenue sources. There's a strong balance of those. Obviously, property tax is now making up about 1/3. So that is a significant amount, but I think that's representative of the strong property values we have in the community. Sales tax sits just over 15%. Next slide. So on the revenues, just looking at next year, like I said, we're $31.5 million. These are just some notable pieces of those revenues that I wanted to point out. Sales tax, I noticed, I mentioned last time, we are adding to the traditional, the number that we had coming into this year, a 5% growth, which is what your sales tax consultant has suggested would be a reasonable number to include. The next, building permits, is going up 25%, and that's the result of we're anticipating 3 major development projects, housing projects being taken on during the next year. Now, not all those have been approved at this point, but we anticipate that sometime over the next year they will. So this reflects both the revenue coming in as well as the expense that we pay for the building permits in this current year. Property tax trend is showing about a 3% growth. This year also shows reinstating of the revenue from ambulance transport. Now, when we were building this budget, we anticipated that we would be back to full complement of transport. That may not be the case. So the revenue and the expense at mid-year may be adjusted down on both of these, but this assumes full funding of all of our fire department as well as this transport. But those numbers can come down relatively based on what ends up being filled or when we bring those the second transport back into service. On the other side of the equation is recreation programs and rentals. And it's really just a matter of, as we start to roll out of the COVID restrictions and when we can start to see reprogramming to the traditional sense we have. So those revenues on both sides are significantly less what they have been historically. And we certainly expect to bring those back to whatever level we can as quickly as possible, and can certainly adjust the revenues accordingly as we get through the year. So a couple of variables in there that we'll keep track on as we go through the current year. Another portion that makes up a significant amount of what I'll call your general fund charges, so that 38 million, is the transfers of general fund expenses. The most significant of those is utility charges. There's also CFD funds that are used to pay for some of our general fund charges that are permitted expenses that we lean on. They're not technically general fund, but they can be used to pay general fund expenses, and those transfers are represented in that $7 million number. And then the last is the use of reserves of 600,000. So that would project that your reserve balance at the end of next year would be just over $9 million, well in excess of your 20% goal or policy that's been established of general fund expenses. Before we move into expenses, I'll stop and just see if there are any questions the council has on revenues.
Any questions, council, for staff? That would be a no. Thank you, Mr. Russ. Continue.
Okay. Moving on then. So on the expenses side, the 63 million is comprised in these 3 major categories, which is how we break out our budget. You have our personnel, operations, and then capital at 14%. As you can see, the predominant, almost 50% is personnel, and being a service-related industry, that is, very logical that that would be the case. But we're balanced out with the operational side relatively well. Next slide. This shows your general fund expenditure breakdown of the 38 million. I think what's important to note here, as we point out, is this is where you define your priority for the use of the dollars. Where is it most important as a community, as a council, where your dollars are spent? And as you can see, roughly just over 60% is going to public safety, both police and fire, which is, a very important aspect that we take priority in the community and the organization. And so those are where those dollars are directed. And then another 20% into public works. That doesn't count the utility side of things. So that is another component on top, but this is just the general fund part of those operations. And then the others fall, as you see below that. Next slide. So high-level observations on expenses that I want to bring to your attention. General fund expenses have gone up by about $2.6 million over last year. And it's broken down into these three major categories. 1.1 million in personnel, which really gets captured into these three areas. The first and probably most significant is the fact that we are fully funding all full-time positions. If you remember last year, we only funded the positions to the extent that we thought we would be able to do the recruitment. When we were putting this budget together, we were in a position where we anticipated that we would either be able to or relatively close to filling all those positions somewhere in July and August. That may not end up being the case, but we wanted to leave the funding there so that we could make that happen. So that significant amount of that increase is the result of that. The second is the sergeant position that has been added. That was added as a result, if you remember, the police department's shift to jail services and coming up with other ways to contracting jail services and finding other ways to improve their operation. This was one of the recommendations that the chief had held off on a year or so ago and was prepared to move it forward this year. And so the funding for that position is included here. Plus the increased general fund support of PD overtime. Not an additional amount of overtime, but the shifting of the funding source for the operational overtime. There was more use of asset forfeiture in years past. That funding source is slowly eroding, and to not deplete it, we needed to shift some amount of the responsibility of the overtime expense to the general fund. So the general fund is now adding about 200,000 of that complement of overtime into its budget to support PD operations. On the operations side, we're going up by about $1 million, and that's for subscription-based agreements, increased development activity, and the increases in the refuse contract. And the subscription-based services agreements are, as I discussed last time, the model changing for some of our providers. Rather than doing something on a 3-year basis or a contract for a 1 year and then going out of support, we are on a commitment for several items, and that's roughly about reflects about 200,000 to 300,000 of that increase. Some of those examples are going to Office 365, body-worn cameras, the citywide camera systems that we need to service. All those have gone to a subscription base, and that is what we are showing. The increased development activity that I reported the revenue on the other side, there is an expense associated to that, and because that went up by 25%, there is an equal increase on your budget or on your development building permit inspections. And then the last of the increases on the expense side is that in the refuse contract. As you know, next meeting, we have a public hearing on the CPI increase as well as the state's regulatory requirements that are driving up the costs for refuse services. Those costs are anticipated in the request for next year because while they're revenue coming in, they are an expense that is going up that we're paying to the waste hauler. And then the last section in the general fund is that of capital. Now, there's about $500,000 of capital expenditure, the one-time expenditures that are represented here that are general fund. But in addition to that, over all funds, the capital expenditures that you will see is 1.5 million of additional that is across all the other funds. So you have roughly $2 million of capital outlay activity that is included as part of this budget. 500,000 is reflected in your general fund.
For equipment.
For not for equipment, just for capital. And then on the equipment side, which is, I'll call it vehicles and all wheeled equipment across all funds, you have 2.1 million in expenditures. And I think that's worth pointing out because that's a significant lot of equipment to be purchasing in 1 year. Now, granted, two of those are, one is a type 3 fire engine, the other is a type 1 engine. So that's taking up about just over $1 million of that. But then there are about 17 vehicles that are being purchased, which is a significant purchase for this year, but it just happened to be a sequence of timing. There's been money set aside for those expenses to be taken on. So, but it is a significant number, and I wanted to make sure that it got pointed out to the council. Before we move off of the vehicles, of the equipment, I think it's worth pointing out the two fire apparatus that are being purchased. The type 3, we are going to be proposing that we do an internal financing on those. So we've done this before, where we borrow the money from like a utility fund or another fund that we have money set aside that we don't necessarily need for the next 3 or 4 years, and then pay that back over time. To take on the purchase of 2 fire apparatus out of the fire, I'll call it equipment fund, would be too much for it to take on at this point. So we're going to do that over a 4 to 5 year schedule. We'll be bringing something back to council with that authorization in the near future. So that's kind of the way to make both of those purchases happen at this time. Any questions on expenses? I know you probably have them for the departments themselves, but anything on the broader sense for me?
Any questions, council, or staff? No, we'll move on.
Okay. Next slide. All right, so just a couple final notes that I want to point out to the council. First, on outstanding COVID issues. So there are a couple of areas where we are still addressing or trying to identify the funds that we will get back. There's the stimulus money, which is the American Recovery Act program that we are still trying to identify where those funds can be used, but certainly there will be a certain amount that will replenish part of our general fund reserves that was used in the prior year. There is also reimbursement from FEMA that there is another amount, but we will not know that for probably the rest of this fiscal year, if not into next. Matter of fact, Christy just told me on the state level, we just got a check for reimbursement back to 2010 on something else. So it could be a while before we see that money. But there is an amount of money that will come back into our coffers as a result. But then the other thing as it relates to COVID, and something for us to keep in mind, is the recovery. We have put this budget together with the best of our assumptions and information that we have from our consultants. But there is a certain amount of how will the economy react? I mean, how, as we start to get back into reopening our society, will inflation play a factor? Will things speed up and then slow down? So that's why I feel it's important that we revisit revenues on a periodic basis. But I think we're not overestimating the revenues we have, because we've always tried to be conservative in those numbers, because we'd rather come out a little lower than a little higher on our revenues, or come out a little higher than what we're projecting and give you a lower number as a target. So, but that's something that we will be monitoring as we start to reintroduce and get back into normal operations as a society. Measure LV, as I mentioned, the Oversight Committee did review the funds, and they did approve the use, and the use is for this current year, which takes into account the increases that happened last year, as well as the ones that were next year, was about $1.8 million of the funds that are being programmed for this next year. I put it in my budget message, and I feel it's worth reiterating here. That revenue source is going to pay dividends for you going forward, because if it were not for that funding source, that was 1.8 million in these median adjustments that we simply wouldn't have had the revenue for. So Hats off to everybody that participated. I know you all were involved in that, but it's going to be very useful for you being able to build your budgets for the foreseeable future. The only thing that is of that, as far as the use, the only thing that we're anticipating the use of at this point is the tier 1. We have not considered or pursued any of the tier 2 use, because anything at this point that is new, we've been able to absorb into the current general fund operating budget and not had to lean on this tier 2. Not to mention that projections are still, the numbers are still too early, as far as it's only the second year into this funding source to really start to anticipate how much money we are going to collect on a going forward basis. We've got a good idea, but we want to get a little more history before we start making additional use beyond the tier 1 at this time. So the committee certainly understands that and is patient, but they certainly want to look at where there will be opportunities to expand some of the services that we can afford to provide with some of those dollars. And so we'll be looking at that over the next year. As it relates to reserves, as I mentioned before, we anticipate 9.1, but I really expect even with the use that we have programmed for this year, we are going to be better than that as we start to look at where those stimulus dollars and if we get some of those FEMA reimbursements back in. So the use that we've had has not really, last year has not been overly harmful, as we thought, to our reserve balance. With that, I would just like to stop and give my thanks to my department heads and their management team, not just for their work on helping to put the budget together, but their work over the last year as we dealt with all of the left turns, unknowns, readjustments relative to COVID, being trusting of the holding their budget lines last year, and we'd replenish if we could, and getting us to the point where we did with last year's budget, and then starting to look at this year. They did an incredible job, and I owe them all the thanks for helping us to get to this point. It's a great team. And some of the new ones coming in, this will be their first budget that they'll be presenting, and I wish them luck on presenting their first budget to the council. Second is to the finance team, but in particular these two people sitting here, because without them and the work that they did, we would not have brought this budget forward to you the way we did. It's I know council can appreciate the document that's before you, but you cannot understand the work that goes into it. And Mark, his interim role has gone on where he's actually passed a probationary employee, so he's no longer interim. And Christy has taken on additional roles in addition to the work that she has been expected to do, and so thank you to you for that. And then finally, the council, and I appreciate your fiscally minded balance of trying to be conservative with the dollars, but also recognizing the need to use them in the appropriate ways. I just compliment you for trusting us and giving us that ability to fund the services in order to serve this community. So with that, I will stop and see if there are any questions, or we can go into department presentations.
Council, any questions for Mr. Russi or staff? Councilman Carter.
I know at the end, this is my 12th budget. So I just want to take this time before we move forward, because it has just evolved to so much money's involved with the bond tax measure, the bond obligation that we have, all these different funds coming in. Christy and Mark, I can't thank you enough. I do know what you go through and each year, and it's just overwhelming, that the thought of it. So thank you for your dedication to our city and to all the department heads putting this together each year. I know you started March, and I appreciate the time. And I want to give especially a big thank you to our city manager, Bob Russi. I know what you have to do to get the departments and to work with them and what monies we have and to keep on top of that. So my gratitude goes out to all of our staff, and thank you from my heart, bottom of my heart.
Thank you, Councilman Carter. Any other comments or questions for staff or Mr. Russi? No? I also want to just mirror that same statement. This has been a rough since April 6th when we took over from a new election, and we basically, the whole world shut down. I just think that I don't think we ever skipped a beat in our city, not one. I think every aspect of the city, every single portion of our city, whether it be public works, whether it be finance, whether it be community services or fire, police, or all of the departments have done an exceptional job. And coming in on the weekends every once in a while and seeing them put up plexiglass when this first hit, just jump into it, moving forward, because we still have to run a city even in COVID, and they did an exceptional job. And I do want to thank every department for the budget. This is not an easy thing to do, especially running a business. You try to put a budget together, and it can be helter skelter, but you guys have perfected it. So I really do appreciate for everyone that's put it together. Thank you, Mr. Russi, for leading a great group of people here. They do a great job, and they do protect our residents, and they keep us fiscally sound, even if we are a pain in the butt sometimes, excuse my French, but you know what? You really do help. Everything that we ask you, you always come forward with it. And I appreciate it personally, because there are questions all the time, but thank you to all the staff. Everybody's done an exceptional job from inside, outside, and all the way around the city. Our employees do a fantastic job. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, with that, we will move into our first presenter, and there he is, timely, JR.
Good afternoon and evening, everybody. I will be doing an overview of the general administration, city clerk, and city manager budgets, which include personnel, risk management, finance, and information systems. These fall under cost centers 1000 through 1700 and encompasses pages 36 through 79 of the draft budget. Under the city council's cost center, there's $90,000 that has been programmed for the public information officer. That will represent the full year of the Trepepi-Smith agreement. So that's new this year. A significant responsibility of the city clerk's cost center is election activity. We do have an election that's scheduled for June of 2022, but in talking with LA County, who will run that election, the cost of that will be in the next fiscal year, so not this fiscal year. So there wasn't any major changes to that cost center. The personnel management division has experienced a large demand in our recruitment, our workers' compensation activity, our employee issues, and then also employees seeking employment, or development opportunities within the city. So with that, we've actually looking at the cost savings that we will have from Dan Kesey's retirement. We're going to upgrade a position as well as bring in a couple extra support staff to help some of those functions. Additionally, this coming year, personnel management will be seeking to review our personnel rules and regulations, which haven't been done since 2003. And so there's some things that will be helpful for us and for employees to take a good look at that and update it to current standards. The proposed budget also anticipates a larger focus on employee development and training. Our hope is that by providing these types of opportunities, our employees will not only gain skills, but also grow with the organization. The finance division is responsible for required financial reporting, including the city's comprehensive annual financial report, and undertakes multiple financial and compliance related audits. The Information Systems Division continues to support and enhance streaming of public meetings, as well as provide the funding necessary for IT services. In reviewing IT needs this year, it was evident, and I know Bob touched on this about transitioning to subscription type services, but there was evident need that we needed to upgrade some software and some hardware that we have with the city to help us function. We actually had a couple outages this year, and it makes it really hard for most of our employees to do their jobs, whether it be the utility system, the financial system, those types of things. So we're hoping with these improvements that we won't have those types of outages. And then lastly, this year also represents the continuing evolution of recognizing, basically consolidating our IT expenses in kind of one place. Throughout the years, it's kind of been where some departments take on a piece of IT funds where another department takes on theirs. We're kind of bringing them together under one umbrella so that they're easier to track and know what's out there. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions, but that takes care of the general administration budgets.
question for Mr. Randalls? Mr. Davis?
Thank you, Mayor. Actually, I just want to make a comment on the fact that you answered the question before I even asked it, which doesn't surprise me, and that is that the costs and the paperwork will follow the general election. And so costs associated with that election will actually fall in the 22-23 budget. Because I looked at that and thought, wait a minute. But
Yeah.
thank you for answering that question even before I asked it.
Yeah, we could have some minimal expenses, but we should be able to cover it in what we're asking for.
Any other questions or comments for Mr. Reynolds? I just a comment. I'm really very happy that we're doing with the servers. I think with these latest hacks out there, with with digital currency and stuff, I think it's and the basically companies put to hostage. I think it's important that we do spend some money on that. It's one of those things that you hate to, but it's one of those things where we're all internet based, we're all web based now, and it's very important that we have massive firewall and great servers to protect us. So I'm glad that we're doing that. I know that Mr. Russi and I have had a chat about that, and I know that it's been an issue with some of the stuff failing, but I think it's very important that we do put some money in that infrastructure that protects all of our residents and our personnel from these unconscionable hacks that are going on right now. But thank you, Mr. Randall. Any other questions for Mr. Randalls?
Not a question, but just a comment on the infrastructure, component of it. I think for, those of us that, have been out in the workforce and have seen what it can be like when delays happen in infrastructure, people end up spending more time, working around inefficiencies and everything else. And it's really just not great. So I appreciate the forward thinking and the consolidation and really looking to the future to make sure that we can run as efficiently as possible, especially with the acknowledgement that, we aren't, 100% fully staffed everywhere. And so I think it's really important that we do try to find the efficiencies where we can. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. Any other questions for staff? We will move forward. I see Mr. Director Scheer is on the screen now. Is that correct, Mr. Russi?
I am here, yes. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of the council, my name is Eric Scheer, Community Development Director, here to present our department's budget for the 21-22 fiscal year. Our department continues its role in the oversight of a balance of land use and economic development, providing for functions for city planning, building and safety, engineering, economic development, and housing. This year's, as the city manager mentioned earlier, this year's department budget is higher than normal in both revenues and expenditures, and that's predominantly based on several large-scale construction projects that are anticipated to potentially be under construction in the next fiscal year. I think it's important to point out also that in the last year, we did not see an impact of COVID on our large-scale projects. Our building permit activity, planning applications, those all pretty much stayed relatively as budgeted, right at the beginning of COVID a year ago this time. And so we didn't see its impact on construction. As you know, the housing costs, the cost of construction, that just has been skyrocketing. So that still has an active development community. So like I said, we have several large scale projects that have been entitled recently or are expected to be entitled the next fiscal year, with some of those projects breaking ground. We'll be bringing on a new full-time assistant planner later this month, as well as anticipate following that up with a new planning intern as well to bring our staffing back to really operable levels for our department, especially on our current workload. We also expect to be bringing the general plan and the housing element back to the council for final adoption early fall, late summer. So those are two big, large-scale projects that will be nice to have completed, I think. We also continue to meet with developers that show interest in our TOD area near the future Gold Line or L Line station. And so the city manager and myself are constantly talking to both developers and property owners about the potential for what the vision of the Old Town Laverne specific plan showed for that areas, and really touting our enhanced infrastructure financing district and the opportunities that we expect that to provide for those future developments. In the last year, we did see the approval of two housing projects. That'd be the 42-unit Amherst project, as well as 17-unit housing project on White and First Street. We also began the design work on the pedestrian bridge which is one of those EIFD planned projects. Thankfully, with a grant from the COG that's being paid for by them, but staff is working almost on a weekly basis on reviewing those, and hope to actually have a study session with the council sometime in the near future with some of the where that's going and kind of some of the details that we've been exploring. While later tonight at tonight's regular meeting, you'll have the annual protest hearing for the Old Town Laverne Business Improvement District. Normally we would talk about some of the fun events that happened in the last year down in the district, and obviously there won't be a lot to report on, but we are definitely more optimistic in the next year of being able to bring some of those events back to the Old Town area. But I want to also thank the district board as well as the Chamber of Commerce for their assistance over the last year and making sure that we did what we could in terms of providing assistance to our businesses to make sure that, they didn't fail, that they had our support, and whether that be with the grant funds or our expansion, allowing of businesses and restaurants to expand out into areas that normally wouldn't be allowed. So the Chamber and the Old Town District Board obviously were crucial in that work. So I want to thank them for that as well. We also, in this last year, were able to scan with grant money all of our paper building permits. So we are basically, and we're initializing our online permitting system. There's still some bugs to work out, so it's not at full scale yet, but that was a lot of work and a pretty big expense, actually, that we were grateful to have access to grant funding, so we didn't burden the general fund with that work. And now we have those building permits going back all the way back to the 1940s, all digitized, before we relied on microfiche cards and physical paper permits. So that's exciting, and hopefully in the future that'll be all accessible to the public as well, to where they'll be able to find permits online, which will be a less burden on staff of filling those requests like we do get on a regular basis. For the next year, again, the general plan and the housing elements expected to go before the city council. That's a big accomplishment, I think. We do have a couple more residential projects, 8 residential homes on Baseline, 50 units on Fruit Street, 8 units on Walnut Street, that are all expected to be coming before you and the Planning Commission for entitlement. So more housing to come, as well as an 80,000 square foot industrial building on White Avenue as well. We also, as I mentioned before, expect to see the commencement of the construction of some of those residential projects that were approved in the last year. So again, our department's budget at 1.7 million this year is a 21% overall increase for our department's budget, but it all very much ties to expected development activity. And again, these are estimates based on our best of ability to estimate when projects might be approved and or break ground. So inevitably there'll be changes once we go to mid-year or even the end of this year, but we typically we try to be conservative, and we typically do a pretty good job of making these estimates. So with that, that concludes my presentation, but I definitely would be happy to answer any questions the council might have.
Any questions for Director Scheer?
Yes, Eric, I have 2 questions for you. The first one is, with you talking about hiring a new planner and then one other employee, will that bring you whole in your department?
Not to where we were pre-COVID. We'll still be short 1 full-time planner,
Okay.
but it's something that we think that we were able to move forward with based on our current workload. We also have a contract planner that's working right now for us, dealing with some of these larger scale projects, which has been very helpful to us, because we'll be able to train our new staff on how to work the public counter, learn Laverne codes, and do the things the day-to-day business versus the large scale projects, which really take an experienced planner to work on. So that frees up Candace and myself to help do that training for our new staff. So
Sure, because what I look at is that you have had a large turnover, your department, of a lot of new employees and new faces. So the training that you have to give and all these major projects coming forward, it's a lot on your department. So I want to make sure your staffing is where you need it to be. So keep us, informed through Bob. If there's something you need, let Bob know to talk to us, okay? But the other question I had, the approval of the annexation and 8-unit residential development proposed for a Baseline. Can you tell me where that is?
So that's directly east of our boundaries on the north side of Baseline, east of Fruit Street before the curve. That
Oh, okay.
long time vacant property there. It's a very large property, but most of it's unbuildable. But it is currently not within the city of Laverne, but it
Right.
would be required to be annexed in order to provide our services, our utility services. And so they're in the process of that. Those entitlements are expected to come before the council and the planning commission later this summer. And then after that, there's a process with LAFCO. If the project is entitled, that has to go forward before they could actually start building. So it's close to coming before you, but still there's a lot of work. It'll be Laverne's first annexation in like 30 years. So it's something that none of our current staff has gone through that process. So it's a little bit of learning curve for us. But we think we have a good handle on it, and we think that it'll be coming forward later this year.
And is that annexed in from LA County or Claremont?
So it's in LA County today, but it's within Laverne's sphere of influence. So
Okay.
the annexation would occur, so they would become part of the city of Laverne.
Okay, thank you, Eric.
Councilmember Crosby.
And just talking about that too, Eric, there's some properties that are just below that are not wanting to be annexed in as well, because we had to ask, by going to the property on the north side, we had to ask also the properties on the south side, correct?
Yeah, there's an existing residential neighborhood there that have Laverne addresses but are not in Laverne and unincorporated county. And so part of this process will require two different applications with LAFCO, one for the south side of Baseline for the existing residential and one for the new project, understanding that the existing residential property owners might not be interested in annexation because there's other things that go along with that, including they're mostly on septic tanks today and that would require connection to sewer and other infrastructure improvements and potentially more property taxes than what they currently have today. And so we did have a workshop pre-COVID with that neighborhood who generally expressed no interest in being annexed, but that is a separate process that would unfold with LAFCO. But we would work with those residents to make sure they could file their protest as if they are in objection to that.
And Eric, I just want to say you and Candace during those meetings were exceptional in giving them all the data and feedback for the residents there. I was part of that and really appreciate what you guys were really forthcoming with all the residents and what it meant to them.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments for Mr. Scheer? No. I just want to personally thank your department also, Mr. Scheer, especially with the business grants that Councilmember Lau and I were part of with Mr. Russi and yourself. And where are we at with that? I know that it was upwards of $200,000 was given out to businesses. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we did have a couple new applications that came in probably in the last month, but there still were more funds in that. So, you know, part of the efforts that we've discussed with the chamber in terms of developing plans on how we can utilize some of this federal money, this relief money, as well as some of those CDBG dollars. They did have more restrictions than I think some of these new federal funds will have. So hopefully that'll help to be able to get to directly to those businesses. But we do have some ideas that we're vetted out with the chamber that we hope that will allow us to continue to provide assistance to businesses in the coming year.
That's excellent. I mean, I thank the Downtown Business District and also our Laverne Chamber that working with you guys have been very good with them, and especially the closure of D Street. And just to make this a smooth transition, it seemed like it was effortless. And I know it was a lot of work, but between you and the Public Works and a lot of all the staff, we saved a lot of our restaurants, and that's a big thing, and they'll be here for some time. And I do appreciate the generosity of the city to give it out to our restaurants. We were a little bit ahead than a lot of other communities, so I'm really proud of our community for that. So, but thank you for all you guys do, and do keep us surprised of what's going on with that annexation, because I have heard some things going on with that as regarding the median and Arrow Highway and access egress. There's some issues there. So if you keep us all informed and what's going on, I would really appreciate that for all of us.
Of course.
Thank you, Mr. Scheer. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We will move to 3. Is that the fire department, Mr. Russi?
Yes, it is. And I think Chief Waterhouse is on. There he is.
Mr. Waterhouse, good evening, Chief. How are you?
I'm good.
Pleasure.
Mayor Hepburn and council members, I am proud to present the fire department's 21-22 fiscal year budget. Now, first, I would like to give credit to former interim fire chief Dave Segura and Tiffany Bailey, my analyst, as well as Robert Russell, the battalion chief, who was instrumental in putting this budget and the presentation together. I didn't have a lot to do with it, but I'll be the one presenting it tonight. So our 21-22 fiscal budget basically will be maintaining our level of services throughout the organization and the services to the residents of Laverne. This year's department operational budget represents a nominal increase over last year's, and last year's was a decrease from 1920 due to the COVID pandemic. That created about a 5% decrease for last year. So now we're trying to move back up, and we are moving in that direction. Most of the increase this year is due to related negotiated salary and benefits. That's a recent development. The good news is the revenues generated by Measure LV, the sales tax initiative, do help offset the increase in the compensations. That limits the impact on the general fund. Our challenges this year have been and continue to be staffing. We currently are running 5 openings in the organization at the firefighter paramedic level. Part of this is due to people taking employment elsewhere. We also have 1 retirement, and we're looking at possibly 1 to 2 more folks leaving the organization within the next probably 3 to 6 months. Right now, we are recruiting. We were able to offer employment to 1 firefighter paramedic, so that puts us at 4 down currently. Our staffing levels will remain at 34 sworn and 2 non-sworn positions. And the only thing cost related that are out of our control are our contractual obligations, as well as our hard goods and soft goods. Our operational budget reflects that demand for current and updated electronic patient care services, firefighter safety equipment, hose testing and replacement, SCBA and self-contained breathing apparatus testing. We have some increases in insurance and fleet rental rates, but our budget will accommodate the associated costs for consumable, durable paramedic equipment, medic supplies, and emergency operations training. As City Manager Russi stated earlier, our biggest capital improvements this year in purchases are the apparatus, both the Type 1 city-style vehicle and the Type 3 off-road brush vehicle. We're working through the purchasing process on that, and he spoke of the financing on that. And that's really all I have to offer for you tonight. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer those.
Council, do we have any questions for?
One thing I'd like to add before, and I apologize, I didn't bring it up, is based on your direction last at the preliminary budget, we've also incorporated the request for the SOC, the standard of coverage analysis. That is included in the department's budget as well. So that was a change from your preliminary budget proposal to the budget that you are seeing before you tonight. My apologies for not pointing that out.
Thank you. Councilmember Carter.
Yes, hi. Hi, Larry. Thank you for joining us. And I know it's a short time you've been here that you have to do this budget report. So you did very well.
Well, thank you.
2 questions I have for you is the first question is that we're constantly hearing from the members of the fire department that they're working under unsafe conditions and the improper equipment, not enough equipment. And so could you please address for us where we are with this? Because I was told once by a battalion chief that he's in charge of the equipment and that all the equipment, they get their equipment. That's something we've always supported. We want them to be safe and we support the equipment. And I was told from a BC that they have the equipment. So could you just clarify that for us and let us know how we are with the equipment status?
Well, I think once we replace this Type 1 and the Type 3, the main equipment as far as firefighting is back up to speed. We need a command vehicle as well, but that's in the works. Aside from that, There's a replacement cycle for those things, and we're a little bit over on the Type 1 engine, the Type 3 engine as well. But that should be addressed in the next few months. I think they're referring to, and I can't speak for them, but the feeling I get so far is it's a combination of two things. It's not only the equipment, but it's the staffing. It's the staffing up. It's the additional station opening at some level, and having a firefighting force for those high risk, low frequency events. That's my interpretation of the safety issue. Now it does, the staffing is affected and what they can do is affected, but there's a process they have to go through to determine whether or not it's safe to attack a fire until everybody gets there. And those are all operational things. And I'd be happy to sit down and fill you in on that later, but that goes kind of in depth.
Okay, so basically though, they do have the equipment they need, hoses and all the equipment they need to either take care of fires as they come up, or if they are out helping, paramedic services to our residents. That is all up to date.
As far as I know, yes.
Okay. My other question is on page 109 of our budget report. I was looking over a number of fire calls. Now I noticed that it jumped from 2020 to 2021. You have 800 number of fire calls. Now below it, you have an asterisk with fire calls are all call types requiring the equipment and personnel assigned to a fire engine. So not necessarily are those fires, correct? I mean, that would be if they're called upon to show up at a home for paramedic services, or could you explain that?
No, I think what those probably are, and this is typical, it includes, so a fire call would include an investigation for smoke. It would include a trash fire, a car fire, a garage fire, anything related to fire would get lumped in that category. I can't explain the fluctuation there in those numbers. That's quite a big jump.
Yes, that's what caught my eye.
Yeah, but no, typically that wouldn't be EMS type calls, wouldn't be included in that.
Not at all. Okay.
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Are there any other questions for Chief Waterhouse? Mr. Crosby, you're muted.
No, thank you. Chief, you said the budget going up approximately $1 million from last year is primarily due to wage increases.
Well, I think that's part of it. It from my numbers, it looks like about a 10% increase, pretty close to that. And I believe about 5% is wages, but I'm not sure how that's timed. There was a wage increase that was given in January, and I'm not sure when it's effective. And then there's another one coming up end of June or July. So I would defer to the city manager on that one.
And then I have a follow-up with that too, city manager, because I'm just looking at, and it might be for the next one too, but police didn't rise the level as fire did if it's just wages. And I know median was primarily for both of them. So that just was my question.
So yes, if you remember the catch up, we caught everybody up, but the catch up for fire was much more significant than that of the other groups because they were further behind from prior negotiations. So to catch them up, it came in two increases, and it showed. That's why it reflected a higher number than some of the other groups.
Yeah, because the police was not close to that $1 million up there. So okay, thank you, I appreciate it, and good raises for them.
Any other questions for Mr. Chief Waterhouse? No? Mr. Waterhouse, it's a pleasure. And I just had a couple really quick questions. My concern has always been the amount of, let's call it boots on the ground. And I know we've lost, as you just stated, we've lost some people and possibly losing some more. Where are we at with our paramedic? And we're down 4 total, is that correct?
Yes, with bringing this one on, actually the 21st of this month, we'll still be down 4 positions. So we're starting a recruitment process. We're sitting down next week. The flyer has gone out, and I'm not sure of the due date for the applications, but we've just started that process again.
What does that do for opening Station 3, even as a basically an ambulance?
Well, it would help. I mean, we'll need, we would need to get at least 6 or 8 folks to open the ambulance, to open the current ambulance. And then if we were approved to open another unit, that would take another 6. So, that's a lot of bodies, a lot of money. And we're having a difficult time recruiting people. So I couldn't say when we could possibly get that many folks on board, but we'll get a list together.
Okay. Yeah, because we're, as residents, want to make sure that we're serviced by our fire department and make sure we have enough personnel to not only protect our residents, but also protect themselves. And I think that's very important. As far as the equipment, I do look at the bills quite often, and I do see that our SCBA tanks, our hoses, ladders, a lot of the defibrillators, a lot of the equipment they have been replacing. So I will say that's great. I know that I think it's Captain Hartunian that's doing that. It watches over the equipment. So it's nice to see that we've got the proper equipment. Again, at the end of the day, you need people to use it. So that's the most important thing. So.
Yeah, and I would give kudos to our folks, that Captain Hartunian, and we have several others that do subordinated tasks for us to keep us up on hose and SCBAs and ladders and all the things that we need. So I really appreciate their effort and the funding source from the council. Thank you.
Please keep us all apprised of what's going on. I know that it's delicate, and I know that people are leaving, and most important thing is the safety of our residents. So please keep us all informed through the city manager, that we know what's going on, so that we can, whatever we need to do to help you to make it work better, we'll try our best. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Mr. Paz, Chief Paz, are you ready, sir?
Yes, sir. How you doing?
Good, thank you, sir. You may begin, I guess. Mr. Russi, he's ready to go.
Good
He's
afternoon,
good to
Mayor.
go.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Before you is the budget for the police department. At this time, I want to provide you a brief overlook of the department. But before I do that, I'd like to thank my staff for putting the budget together. And I want to thank Christy Lopez and Mark Alvarado. They are a great help. And I know that we bug them a lot, and they're always very accommodating. But I want to thank everybody for that. I want to start with personnel. Right now, patrol is fully staffed. The only issue right now that I have is that we are down 5 officers due to injuries. Some of them are light duty, some of them are completely off. That has had an effect on our overtime budget, so that we can maintain the minimum staffing levels. Our dispatch, I was hoping to tell you that we are also fully staffed in that department. However, we are still working on one individual that is going through the background. So hopefully, if they get through the background, we will be fully staffed in dispatch as well. Records, I'm happy to say that we continue to be fully staffed there. With the savings from the jail services that we contract out to Pomona, we will be adding a new sergeant position. I want to thank council for that. That should help us quite a bit. We will also be upgrading a position from administrative secretary to a management analyst. Also, we recently implemented our body worn camera system, and we upgraded our in-car video system, which came as a package. We also added our new canine, our patrol canine, Dino. He's in full service right now, and I want to thank the Laverne Canine Foundation for that, which came up with the majority of the money for that, for the dog and the equipment. Some future concerns for future budgets are that, as the city manager alluded earlier, the majority of our vendors that we do business with have gone to a subscription-based business model, and this has increased our costs. Before, we used to be able to purchase equipment just outright at one-time cost and use it till it was obsolete or broken, and we bought, another batch, such as tasers, radios and stuff like that. But now all the vendors have seem to have gone to the new business model, which, like I said, is a little more expensive. So it's going to probably add a little bit more to the budget in the coming years. Other than that, I don't have anything else to add unless you have any questions. Anybody have any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Paz? Yes, Mr. Davis.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for your budget, Chief, and I concur with you on thanking everybody and from the bottom to the top and everywhere through the middle on all the effort that goes into preparing and integrating and coordinating budgets. That's a Herculean effort, and so thank you and your staff, as well as later I'll thank the finance folks, because they do have to speak many languages. So the question I had specifically, and maybe this is just something to think about, or maybe you know the answer, and that is, since we're going to a subscription service, does that mean upgrades and or replacements are already included in that subscription service, or are replacements an additional fee on top of that?
Yeah, so that's one of the positives of going to a subscription, is that they include anything that breaks down, they replace it automatically. All the upgrades are included. It is a little more expensive, but I think in the long run, it's worth it.
So we'll see regular fees that increase rather than chunky fees where all of a sudden we need 300,000 or 750,000 to replace a comm system or something like that.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Chief Paz, Council? Yeah, that's one of the questions that Councilmember Davis had said. It seems like most of the things we do now is subscription based, which means it's really a rental, long-term rental.
Yeah.
And which is good about that, because the technology is changing so quickly, especially for you and also any of the fire dispatch or police dispatch and internal body cams, things like that. The technology, look at Motorola. Look at Motorola, used to be that was the end all give all for radios. And now it's like, so again, and I'll always repeat, we at the council are very concerned about the safety of our residents, and whatever you guys need, we've always told you that, please let us know. We can work on it. The safety of your personnel with the equipment, you're getting some new vehicles, which is great, because I know the vehicles are, they get a little worn out real quick. So, even if it's short distance, it's a lot of usage and a lot of wear and tear. So if there's things you need, please let us know, because it's very important, along with our police, along with our fire, along with our public works, very important we keep our residents safe and keep your personnel safe with the right equipment. So thank you for what you guys do. And again, we couldn't do it without Christy and Mr. Alvarado as far as the finance part. They're the glue that holds this together. So, but thank you very much. Any other questions for Chief Paz? Thank you, Mr. Paz. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. We're moving to
Now presenting her first budget ever,
Oh.
Community Services Manager Yvonne Duran. Welcome.
Manager Duran, good evening. How are you? Oh, you're muted.
Bob.
There you go. You're good. You're good.
Thank you for the introduction, Bob.
Are you in your new office?
No, I'm still in my favorite office at the community center.
We're gonna get you out of there.
Eventually, slowly but surely.
Well, thank you very much. You can start anytime you want.
So, Honorable Mayor and Council, tonight I bring to you the Community Services Department budget. As a recreation professional over the last 15 years, never did I imagine I would be closing our facilities to the public, as our department relies heavily on community interaction. So it was very difficult the last year to program. As you know, we faced many obstacles, but the safety of our residents, outreaching to our seniors was our #1 priority this last year. Some of the programs that we came up with, thank you to staff who was very innovative. We established the senior curbside meals. We were able to do preschool on the go. We were able to do virtual recreation, coffee talks, numerous outreach services, calling seniors daily, over 100 calls. So I do want to thank my staff for being able to just kind of get through the entire pandemic. Something that you guys may not know, we do maintain 4 facilities, and it's not all public works, although they do help us tremendously. We maintain the community center, the aquatic center, Veterans Hall, and Oak Mesa Recreation Facility. Part of this budget funding, it's definitely different. It shows this fiscal year our reorganization of our department with the retirement of the community services director. We were able to establish a community services manager, community services supervisor, community services coordinator, and a community services specialist as well. The only vacancy we currently have is a coordinator that we hope to establish at the beginning of the fiscal year. But I think it's a good step ahead where we're able to kind of spread out the work. We're not so top heavy, so I'm very excited for that and the changes to come. I know a lot of you are thinking, Yvonne, when are you going to reopen? When are you going to open up your facilities? And while the budget presented is not a traditional offering of revenues and expenses, the state and the county hasn't made clear direction on how we can reopen. They just released community services protocols. One thing that has been determined thus far is senior curbside meals. So as of right now, senior curbside meals will remain for the next 4 to 5 months. With that being said, in the summer, the plan is to open the community center in Veterans Hall in the afternoons, offer the HOA meetings, offer meeting spaces, the classes that are allowed. But until then, that's what we have planned for the summer. But in the fall, we hope to resume everything. We hope to resume our rental facilities. We're prepared with marketing aspects and things to put out to the community. I'm ready to open. It's just I need a little bit more guidance from the county specifically. Although we've been closed, we've been able to take care of a couple of things off our honey-do list, as I say here. I know many of you guys have read, but may have not visited. We renovated the restrooms at Veterans Hall. They are now ADA compliant. We were able to redo the hallway. We added a drinking fountain as well, and we painted the building, added some new signage. At the community center, we were able to purchase a new freezer and refrigerator for the senior curbside meals. And we also upgraded our registration system. So right now we're slowly offering some classes. I will let everybody know preschool, vacation preschool is full. So lots of good signs that we are returning back to normal. So I'm very happy to share that with you tonight. There is one capital outlay that we are requesting in the swimming pool. It's about $40,000. It's to redo all the pool lighting to LEDs to be more cost efficient. Remember that we do split that 3 ways between the university, ourselves, and the high school. So initially we pay the cost up front, but it will be split in thirds. But tonight, that's pretty much what I have presented to you as my first budget. Very excited, very, how can I say, looking forward to the next year because I'm done being closed. I want to see my seniors. I want to see that interaction and just seeing the public again. But now I will open up for questions for council.
Councilmember Crosby.
Thank you. You said that's 3 ways between the district and the university for the pool lights. Do they have to okay it through their boards as well? So what happens if they don't? Would that cost then go to us?
Our agreement with them, they have to pay. So it's something that as a joint facility use, we have to. We've never had an issue before, but it's something you either pay it or you can't use it. It's kind of easy way to explain it.
And thank you so much. And thank you for last week opening up the inclusion playground too. That was a great opening too. So appreciate that.
Not a problem.
Thank you.
Very happy to be a part of that.
Yvonne, I thought during your speech here too, since it's your first budget, is since you, Wendy, and I sit on the committee for the 4th of July, is that here's a good place for you to announce publicly about the 4th of July events that we're going to have. And what we went through too to get to this point, was constantly wanting to do what was best for the residents under COVID restrictions. So would you go on with that?
So a lot of the things the 4th of July committee did is we wanted to do something. There was a plan A, there is a plan B. We followed the guidance very closely, and we are very confident that we are able to fulfill this. So as a committee, we decided to hold the 4th of July events. Granted, 4th of July this year does land on a Sunday. So traditionally, the parade is held the day before, which is July 3rd. So we will have a parade. We will have a fireworks show the following day. We will not have country fair. It's just a little bit difficult with the regulations that have been placed upon us after the 15th, as far as we know. But I think it's a good opening to like, hey, we're back. We want to do things for the community. We welcome the community. And we're very excited. It is going to be limited for the majority of the entries and for ticket sales to Laverne residents. We will be pushing out more information on social media as I work with Holly on that in the social media aspect. But we're very excited with the committee and things that are forthcoming. But we're having it. We're inviting all our residents here in Laverne to start it off. And hopefully next year we can just go back to normal business.
Thank you. Councilmember Lauer Davis, do you have any comments? Mr. Davis.
Yeah, just to follow up on Councilmember Crosby's question a little bit more, is a 40,000 the total amount, which we might divide into 3, or is 40,000 our expected third of the pool lights?
It's the total amount divided by 3. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Even if it was 120,000, it's important to have lighting in a pool. So I would still be in full support. Because I think the pool is one of the gems, not the only gem, but one of the gems of our community services programs. And I want to applaud you for everything that you do on such a light budget. It's marvelous. And the last question is just something that residents have been asking me, and maybe you don't know this answer, but are the Boy Scouts planning to serve breakfast the morning of July 3rd? Do we know that answer?
Unfortunately, they decided as a group, not this year.
Okay.
But on that note, I will let you know the Boy Scouts did do some beautification to Veterans Hall this last fiscal year as Boy Scout projects. And they are going to add a few more things. So we work hand in hand with them. But unfortunately, they decided as not, but they will be at the fireworks show helping us do the front entrance and probably selling waters and their glow sticks. So they will be there.
I think that hopefully, I think that they're making decisions based on their information, just like we have. And I think it's a prudent decision for them. I'm just glad they've made a decision, though, so that that information then can flow out to the community in advance of the parade. So people aren't showing up the morning of and saying, wait, I thought they were going to be here. And clearly we're nearly a month ahead, and so we can make sure the word gets spread. So thank you for everything you do, and I appreciate the fact that the Boy Scouts are going to be helping to the extent that they can. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Yes, not a problem.
Councilmember Lau.
So my follow-up question to the follow-up questions with regard to the pool lights then. So it's 40,000 total. Do we, just because I'm not familiar, do we then just invoice out to the university and the district? So we'll expect to see 2/3 of that money come back into the budget?
Correct. So we pay the cost up front, and then we get reimbursed and we bill them afterwards. But we always pay the cost up front. So that's why we put in the 40, but we bill them and then they pay afterwards. So no issues thus far. Right now, we've been paying $3,000 here, $4,000 there. They just need to be replaced.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yvonne, I can't.
Revenue,
Go ahead.
sorry, Mr. Mayor. That revenue is already reflected in our numbers for the
Budget. Yeah.
Sorry.
I want to personally thank you, your staff. You guys don't walk, you run everywhere you go, between the Halloween, between Christmas, between the latte last week, the inclusive playground. Your people and the connection between Holly at the police department, the fire department, getting people together. You're kind of like the glue also that kind of puts it all together. And me personally, I appreciate it because during COVID, you guys didn't stop. Your virtual classes, your virtual stuff, your dances, just all the things, the meals, the lunches. You guys did a great job. I mean, it's one of those things that people go, oh, what's going on over there? Well, they're giving lunches out to seniors. It's like, and then you do the all the awards and stuff. I can't thank you guys enough. And I know it's a combined effort from everybody, but the community services department, it's a great, great department. You work well with public works. You work well with police and fire. You do so many things for us. And I know we all appreciate it. And the thanks can't go enough for all the departments with COVID. It was just such a tough time, but you guys have done an excellent job. All your staff, they're always friendly, they're always polite, and great job. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's a team effort. We're a full service city, right? And we're here to work together, not against each other, together.
Yeah.
So I'm a big proponent of that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rand. I appreciate it. You have a good evening. Mr. Igo, you are on, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening,
Welcome,
Mayor.
by the way. Let me say
Thank you.
welcome. Welcome, Public Works Director, Mr. Sean Igo. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. And this is also my first budget, so hopefully I'll go through it. I mean, to be honest, most of this I owe to the team for Public Works Management and also the finance team that did a great job putting this budget together. So a big shout out and thanks to them. So tonight I'll be presenting to you the Public Works budget. We're looking at about a $22.7 million request this year. This is about a 6% increase from last year. About a third of this is actually due to the refuse contract, as Mr. Russi pointed out earlier. Additionally, we have our capital outlay, which is for our fleet. And then the remaining part of that is additional material and costs related to COVID. So we're asking for some of that money back from COVID reductions from last year. But as many of you know, we really did have a significant increase in cost of material related to COVID, and there's chip shortages. The cost of wood has gone up, so we're just seeing significant increases across the board. So that really covers the majority of the increases. But as you all know, Public Works is committed to maintaining the city's infrastructure and providing high quality service. And this budget really ensures that we're doing that fiscally responsible and in an effective manner. And the Public Works departments include 6 primary areas, which include building, streets, water, sewer, fleet, and parks. We're additionally responsible for contract management and managing grants as well. And as you all know, we're also responsible for our capital improvement program. This year, we did see several projects completed, including the Fruit Street medians, traffic signal on White and Durwood, which was just completed and put into service. And then we also have our Hawthorne Avenue street rehabilitation project that was completed. And then finally, the Wheeler Reservoir water system improvements. So that really covers the majority of our projects that are completed. But I really want to highlight, what Public Works does. We're responsible for the maintenance of nearly 100 miles of the street network, over 10,000 parkway trees, over 150 vehicles, approximately 132 miles of water mains, 10 reservoirs, pumping and treatment facilities, and over 100 miles of sewer mains. And that's just a few things. So we're responsible for a significant amount of infrastructure. And, we'll continue to do that. We're also being responsible with environmental compliance as it's related to water, stormwater, and wastewater. And then also as it relates to solid waste compliance, which now relates to Senate Bill 1383 and Assembly Bill 1594. So, regulatory compliance will always be here, especially on the Public Works side. And so we'll have to continue to manage that as part of this budget. And we'll also continue to do that as fiscally responsible as possible. Additionally, we do have our landscape maintenance districts, which encompass about 33 acres within 9 of those districts. And then we also try to conduct twice per year about 83 acres of brush clearance in Laverne Heights, Marshall Canyon, and Live Oak assessment districts. So the services provided by the Public Works Department is the foundation for the city's overall services that we deliver to the community. This contributes to making the city of Laverne a safe, attractive, and vibrant community. Again, I greatly appreciate the involvement of the Public Works team put together this budget. And with that concludes my overview of the budget. I'm here to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Igo. Do we have questions first from Mr. Igo? No questions. Robin Carter.
Sean, I'd like to welcome you publicly. We've met,
you.
we've talked about some of the topics, and you seem to really have the support of your staff bringing you up to date. I was happy to hear that. You have a great staff, and we're here to support you. And I welcome you, and thank you for the wonderful report.
Thank you. I fully agree. We have a great team here.
Any other? Mr. Davis.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And Sean, I too would like to welcome you and congratulate you on the successful representation of your first budget. As you're saying, you carry the message this year, next year, you'll be a little more involved in developing it, but job well done.
Thank you.
As a new person to our community, I would really like to get some of your, a sense from you on your impressions coming in. How are we doing things? Do we do things similarly to the way other communities do their work? You guys manage, hundreds of contracts, some small, some very large. We've had many discussions internally on how we should be managing those contracts, and we can get into policy later. I just want to say I think our policy is well written and describes how and why we do certain things. But I wanted to get a sense from you whether or not you think that there is a major shift that Laverne should take because we do things very differently from other communities, or do you think we're pretty much in the status quo or within the statistical bounds of what most communities are doing?
So I'll tell you this, is that overall, I see the direction Laverne is headed as being more progressive in their maintenance of their infrastructure, which is huge. Not every city is as aggressive in dealing with their roadways or their water system, things like that. And so that's definitely a good direction the city is heading. Because if you don't maintain it now, it's going to cost you a lot more money later. So that is huge. Regarding, contract management and maintenance, I read the policy several different times because it's a pretty thorough policy, but really it comes down to we're pretty much in line with how contracts are managed. Broadly, I will say that, when you start going out for RFP for several contracts, which some of these are identified as looking at the next year or two, is that what you will typically see is if you've been in contract with someone for 5-10 years, you're most likely going to see a significant increase with related services. And that's just going to be predominantly due to, good working relationships you have with current vendors. Typically what I see is when you go out to contract and you get on a new vendor, you're going to see things that were done by the previous vendor or contractor at little to no cost. And so those costs have to be accounted for with this new vendor. And so you're going to see those costs increase dramatically. I know one of the local cities looked at going out to contract for their landscape maintenance, and they saw I think it was about $100,000 increase in their contract costs annually. And that cost is due to, because if you're trying to incorporate all of the little things that your current contractor does, you're going to see those increases. So again, overall, I think the way we manage our contracts is done very well. It's very diligent. And I think having the latitude to come to council to provide our thoughts and our processes on how we're doing contracts is really a prudent way to do things.
Thank you for sharing your perspective as being a new member of our management team. So thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Lau, any questions for Mr. Igo? I just want to personally thank you. I know that we've had a few conversations on the weekend, a few little emails with potholes and sinkholes. But as for your staff, you've got the largest pool of employees, which is, 46 plus. And anyone I've ever come in dealings with has been always pleasant and always very gracious, and they work well with all the other groups. And between the vehicles, between the streets, between the water, I see them all the time. They're always working. They're working. No matter where they are, they're working, and they do a great job. And again, with D Street closure, I know this was before you, but just, we closed it quickly. When Yvonne needs anything or the police or fire, they're always there. Whether there's a problem, they always address it. There's a water issue or a break and there's a flood, and, and the vehicles, they do maintain a lot of vehicles. And I know that's not easy. And I know we're missing a real wonderful person that, passed on. But I just want to thank you and your staff. You're kind of like the unsung heroes that are always there, always around. And I think as myself, and I'll speak for council, we appreciate what they do because they keep this city running. They keep our water flowing. They keep, our streets in good shape. And if there's an issue, they address it quickly. So your staff and yourself and all of them, we do want to thank you very much and welcome on board. We do appreciate that.
Thank you very much, Mike. Appreciate it.
We have capital improvements. Is that correct, Mr. Russi? I think we have Mr. Igos on again, or is that going to be you? We lost Mr. Russi.
Yep, looks like we lost our city manager for the moment.
We're good. We're here. I think Mr. Igo, I think you're going to take that one anyway, aren't you?
I think that Mr. Rusty was going to go ahead and take that one.
There he goes. We're back.
There, he's back.
We lost you. You're muted. There you go.
Apologies. We were literally ready to get started and it kicked me off. So, Don, I'll go ahead and take it. That's fine. Thank you. Yeah, I'll take these next two sections. I know Sean was ready to jump in, and next year he will be taking those on, but I'll handle them for this year. These two sections reflect your capital improvement budget, your capital outlay, and your special programs. Those first two areas, the capital improvement, we did in detail at your last meeting, as you know, which outlined not just your current year, but your 5-year plan. The thing that's identified in your budget here is your approval of the spending authority for the next year's project. Capital outlay, I went into some detail on that as part of my overall presentation, so I won't spend any time on that. But I will spend a little minute on the special programs that you have listed and that are approved as part of this budget or are being considered as part of this budget. You have CDBG at about 100,000, LA Impact at about 2.1, which, as you know, that is an area where we are a fiduciary for the task force and take on their funding responsibility. So that's included in your budget for approval. You have Prop A projects at about 650,000. 300 of that is for a fund exchange, which is money we put towards general fund operations. Prop C, excuse me, is about 700, almost 800,000. A significant amount of that is for a partial street resurfacing project that we'll be taking on. And then the other part is for related to gold line related design activities. And you'll start to see more funds being used towards those activities in the coming years out of Prop C. Measure R has a resurfacing project of 650,000 as well as Measure M activities of roughly 600,000. The only other highlight to that is we have miscellaneous grants, and I want to point this out because where we can take advantage of outside funding sources for areas that are supplemental or beneficial to our operations, we will. This next year, we have about just over $600,000 in grants activity that we are pursuing. So that is kind of an overall highlight of special programs and capital outlay. Does council have any questions regarding that?
I actually, just to bring up a subject, we've been talking about Pelota Park, and I know we're doing the shade structure, Mr. Igo, and that's almost going to kick off here pretty soon. Thank you very much for that. That's been and Councilmember Carter and I have been involved with the youth sports on that with Little League. I know that we've missed a couple of the grants recently, but we kind of made a promise. I know that Public Works Director Dan Kesey at the time regarding grant money for turf replacement. So if those things do continue and we get some traction on that, if you could please keep us informed so we can have a meeting on that. So to see where we move forward with the turf project, and because I know there wasn't anything in the CIP, and there was mention of that, but I know that we talked about that. So you're working on that. So we just want to make sure you keep the council apprised of that, so we know what's going on with the grants, if we could, if that's okay. Sorry.
We will do that.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Russi or Mr. Igo regarding the CIP? Mr. Davis.
So I thought I brought this up last year, but maybe I only dreamed it. I thought we were going to color code the money this year from the different funding sources. Was that not requested last year?
If you did, I do not remember it. I'm looking.
I don't recall that, but
Are you meaning the different funding sources here?
Yeah, you know which one's the purple money and which one's the yellow money, because it gets all very confusing, and I think colors would help to code it. It'd make me think more of Monopoly, but
there's a lot of colors in there, though. There's a lot of colors.
There are a lot of colors in it, and
that's okay.
I think it would help the visual to be able to see, because a lot of what we do, as you're saying, uses other people's money, and I think we should, we're very fiscal and prudent with spending our money and other people's money, and I think color coding might help. So just an idea.
Let us take a look at it and see what we can come up with. We'll float, probably not for this budget, but
Right.
maybe during this budget year, we can float some ideas as to how that could work as part of the next budget.
You couldn't color code that tonight before the end of the meeting? I'm just curious.
I don't have enough highlight.
Mr. Ivo could probably do it. It's a
Sit down and
newbie.
be
Come on.
quiet.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Lau, do you have a question or a comment? I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I do think the color coding might help, especially because some of those funds are restricted. So I think it might help to clarify, not just for us, but for residents too, if they're looking at the budget, why some of those things can't be moved to other, other pockets. So clarifying that might be helpful.
Great. Then we will do that. I know we all remember now. So there you go. Does anybody have any questions for staff? For Mr. Russi or anyone? I think we need, then we're gonna move forward. I think we need to make a minute motion. Is that correct? Do we need to do a roll call on that, Mr. Russi?
Yes, but you may want to, you do have the opportunity.
I'm sorry. Public comment. Do we have any public comment, JR? We'll close this meeting and we'll go into public comment.
I just checked with the city clerk to confirm we have not received any public comment for the budget presentation.
Staff has done such a fantastic job. There are no questions out there. Very good.
You do have an attendee who's raised their hand.
Yeah, we do have hands raised.
I cannot see that. I'm sorry. Where'd you see that? Down at the bottom?
Click on
Mr.
participants.
Bowen.
Yeah, if you click on participants, you can see panelists and attendees and click to see who's there.
Just did it. I think I did see Mr. Bowen was in the room. So
Good evening. I just have one question. The SOC request that's in the fire budget, nobody's ever mentioned how much that costs. Can you just tell us what the cost is for that SOC?
I do not have a cost. We have budgeted, I believe it is $60,000, 50 or 60. We are putting it out to an RFQ, but we have been told that that is a rough estimate of what it would cost to do the SOC.
Okay, and my last question would be, with the gold line potential in the next couple of years and the issues facing the police, it looks like their budget is pretty stagnant. Do we anticipate in the next year or two that you're going to have to substantially increase the police budget based on the current issues that face police all across the country, as far as higher crime rates, et cetera, et cetera? So I wonder if that was taken in consideration. Thank you. Otherwise, thank you all. Looks like you did a great job.
thank you, Mr. Bowen. Councilmember Carter, you have your hand up.
Oh,
There you go. Do we have anybody else? I don't see anybody else with their hand up as far as that Councilmember Lau so graciously showed me how to do this again.
do you want me to attempt to answer the second part of that question, Mr. Mayor?
Please.
Yeah, I would not say that substantially on any of the services that are, they're looking at substantially increasing any of the service relative to Gold Line, whether it be police, fire, public works. We certainly are remaining cognizant of the effects that are occurring as the stations have opened in some of our neighbors to the west, I'll say, and trying to prepare for some of that. Certainly, we do expect that that will result in some type of increased request from the departments. It is certainly part of the reason why we are pursuing some of the development activity we are to help support some of those additional services, as well as some of the ancillary activities that we would like to see beneficial down in that area. So there's a lot of changes, admittedly, that will come as a result of Gold Line coming in. And we are monitoring those, and we will look to make those changes as some of those issues come into play.
Okay, very good. We have anybody else? I don't see anybody else with their hand up. JR, nothing else on the call in?
No, sir.
We'll go ahead and close public comment and move to, we need a minute motion. So we need a motion from somebody. Councilmember Carter, you're silenced, but I got the hand up.
Yes, I'll make that motion.
And then do we have a second on the motion?
I will second the motion to move this budget forward. And in doing so, I just want to thank Christy and Mark and everybody. We were under COVID, we were transitioning management, we were acquiring new management. Beautiful job. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. We will do a roll call vote.
Okay, Councilmember Lau,
Aye.
Councilmember Crosby,
Yes.
Councilmember Carter,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Davis,
Aye.
Mayor Hepburn.
Yes. Motion carries. Do we move to now, do we have anybody for public comment?
You mean just for outside of agenda item?
Outside of the title, yeah, outside of what our agenda. Does anybody, I don't see anything for hands up. Does JR have anything?
No, I know we have a number of requests for the regular meeting, but not for this meeting.
Okay, then if we don't have any conflict here, we'll go ahead and adjourn at 6:05 PM. Our next regular meeting is within like 25 minutes at 6:03 PM. So everybody will see you in a few. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, staff.
Thank
Great
you.
job.
Different bat channel.